Join us at Polepole, where Dorcas shows us a new perspective of what the African community is doing now.
Hello Australia, welcome to Oz African TV. I'm Dorcas Utkovic, and today we're talking about media. It is without doubt that diversity in any capacity is a big area of opportunity within the media industry, not only in Australia but all over the world. Having said that, it's also fair to acknowledge that new media, especially the internet, presents opportunities for people coming from different walks of life to begin to tell their stories. And to discuss this further, in the tent, I will be joined by Santilla Chingaipe, who is a journalist from SBS News. And downstairs, Polepole, I'll be talking to the co-founder of an online platform, The Pin, and she's also a musician, Nkechi Anele. And finally, I'll have a chat to Colleen Chifamba, who is a blogger. So let's go to Polepole and let's get started in the kitchen with Chef Stolley.
These are thoughts that unfold from the mind of a believer. A simple man follows the path of the achiever. Reach for the top of the world like North Pole. The humble stay safe, all they know.
Hey Chef.
Hi.
What are you making?
Right now I'm making masala chips.
You can cook with us by jumping on our website to download your recipe and shopping list with ingredients that you can buy from your local supermarket.
This is a Kenyan favorite and it's become a favorite here at Polepole.
Wow, there are a lot of ingredients.
Yeah, we're going to make a nice masala sauce and toss some fried chips through it, topped with coriander and fresh lime.
Oh, yum. I can't wait for that. Well, I'll leave you to it, and while he tosses it all up, we are going to meet our next guest, so come with me. My next guest is a dedicated, talented and award-winning journalist who reports for SBS World News. Santilla Chingaipe, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So you are a journalist, as I said. What does it take to become a journalist?
That's an interesting question. I would say curiosity. Like a lot of, you'd have to be a very curious person. You have to have a passion for telling stories. I know it sounds a bit of a cliche, but I think that's true. And just have an area of interest. It's not true for everyone, but certainly that tends to help, I guess.
I know you report on a whole lot of different stories, but do you have any of your favorites that you like to report on?
I think that's the beauty of working for SBS is that you just get to cover so many areas and so many interest areas. Things that I never used to find very interesting now interest me so much. Like I love space and science stories. I was never one of those people. I know, but I actually genuinely enjoy doing those stories.
Yeah.
And I also love telling stories about, migrant communities and the change in how, people that arrive in Australia from various countries settle and the challenges that presents and also some of the wonderful opportunities that presents and following that has been really quite interesting. And if I go into specifics, it would be, the African community in Australia that tends to be an interesting area for me to cover and tell stories about for sure.
And talking about the migrant community, I know that you're working on a documentary. Can you tell me a little bit about the documentary that you're producing?
Yeah, sure. So I'm directing it as well. I mean, the news format is very limiting. It's a wonderful medium and it serves a purpose, but it's very difficult to get into the nuances and the complexities within certain communities. And I think for the longest time, the South Sudanese community, from my observation in terms of how the media has covered it, has been a very one-dimensional view, so this very troubled and troublesome community.
Yes.
And my experiences with the South Sudanese community have been very, very different, of course. And I travelled to South Sudan after independence and spending a lot of time with the community, like any community.
Yeah.
You get to see just how diverse, how complex, the richness of the stories. And I just sort of thought, let's try and share this narrative as well.
Yeah, and talking about a different side of the story, do you think the Australian I don't like to say mainstream media because, media is media. You choose what you want to do. But do you think, in your observation and your experience throughout the time that you've been a journalist, is it changing? Is it growing? Are we telling different stories? Are we attempting to, be inclusive and try to be more than just one-dimensional?
That's a very tricky one, and I don't know if I'm the best person to answer it because there would be a bit of bias because I work for a multicultural broadcaster, so by default, that's how I look at the world and that's how the world presents itself to me. Are there shifts happening? I think so. Slow, absolutely. But, again, we're still a very young country. Migration is still a very young experience in this country, so, yeah.
And how important do you think it is to, yes, some people came here by choice and some under difficult circumstances and all that kind of thing. But how important do you think it is to kind of shift the focus more to positive stories, to what people are doing now as opposed to what they've done? I know that history is part of who we are, but in the media, how important do you think it is?
I certainly think one of the most important things in shifting that, whether it's from how media organisations report on African communities, how African communities are seen, whether it's in cinema, whether it's in film or whatever, starts with, to a certain extent, the community itself telling its own narratives and trying to take control of the narrative. And these days I think that with the internet and with the opportunities that provides to bring in various forms of narratives, it will allow for people who perhaps would have never considered that side of the story to start thinking about these sorts of things. It's very difficult for people to understand an experience that is not a lived experience, and to see things from a different lens. With us as a community as well, it's also taking a bit of ownership in our stories and saying, okay, I'm not seeing this. How can I add to this conversation? What can I do? Why is this important? And it's not necessarily that difficult. These days you could just get your iPhone or whatever and film something, put it on YouTube, or record a podcast or whatever it is. But as long as you're having a conversation, offering a different alternative, I think eventually people start to pay attention and they start to listen and they start to go, hang on. So we might not necessarily be right about this community or how we view them. But it's very difficult to get people to see one's experience if it's not their lived experience. And it's a difficult one.
I agree with your last point that we have to take responsibilities and show up and be there and say, this is what we're doing and this is what my community is doing. The news might be that this happened the other day, but we actually are doing some positive stories. But thank you so much for joining me. If you want to find out about the guests from today's episode, feel free to jump onto our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. When you feel different and find someone who shares that common ground, you tend to hold on to each other. And that's exactly what the creators of The Pin, Nkechi Anele and Lucy Cutting, did. These two women created an important discussion platform by biracial Australians for all Australians. Unfortunately, Lucy couldn't be here today, but I am joined by Nkechi. Thank you so much for coming through.
Thanks for having me.
Great. Now, let's just get into it. Tell me about The Pin.
So The Pin is a website that we created and launched in May of this year, and it involves thought pieces, interviews, and expression pieces, which are artistic pieces by biracial and bicultural Australians.
Right. And you, on your website, you use the two words biracial and bicultural. Can you just break it down for us?
So for us, biracial is describing someone who has parents who have come from two different races or two very different cultures and are a product of that. Biculturalism is when, for example, a person whose parents have immigrated to Australia and they're the first generation for their family in Australia. So they may have grown up with an Australian childhood and in Australian society, but within their household there's very much strong ties to the traditions and the cultures of their parents.
Right. And why do you guys feel that it's important to tell the stories that you're telling right now?
I think we've kind of reached a time where a lot of people who are our age, who have had similar experiences, really want and need to get their stories heard. And it was also out of identifying that in broadstream media, there wasn't a discussion that related to biracialism and biculturalism.
Yeah. And what are some of the challenges that you guys meet along the way? Because I know that you and Lucy are working really, really hard on this website.
Well, first of all, it's the first time that we've made a website like this. Lucy has written a blog, but she has her own personal blog. But I myself have never created something like this before, so we're very new to this area. Also, because of that, we approached people when we were very much in the infancy of this idea, saying we don't have a website yet, but we would really like to create one and would like you to be involved. So challenges came from just getting people interested and knowing that we were genuine when we were asking for their story and to meet up with them and to get to know who they are. And I think that's been it so far, luckily. We've had a really good run.
That's really good. And you guys have received a really positive reaction from the public. You're getting media coverage and people are really interested in what you're doing. Why do you think is that?
I think we're at a really important time right now when we're looking at overseas as well as in Australia. Things like immigration and identity are very strong topics at the moment. And also with the power of the internet, a lot more people are connecting and trying to find out who they are and where they fit in on a global scale, not just where they are in real life. No, the internet is an amazing place. We all have to agree. And also art plays a major role in all of our lives. And you're also in a band, Sasquatch. How do you kind of, how does that relate to what you do on the pin and in your life and your identity in general? Well, when it comes to the pin, a lot of the discussions center around identity. Being biracial myself, I had a lot of issues with trying to come to terms with where do I fit and what is my identity. Is it culturally tied or is it something that I've created for myself uniquely? And what I found is through art and through performance, it's probably one of the only times that I actually don't worry about my identity and feel very strong about who I am and don't feel that I need to question it or anybody else needs to question it. So art has a really powerful effect on people, whether they're from an audience perspective or the artists themselves. And we wanted to bring that to the pin, and that's why we've chosen to have an express section, which involves having the creative biracial and bicultural Australians work expressed there for people to view and get to know.
Yeah, sounds good. And how did you guys come up with the name? It's a very catchy name, isn't it?
Well, we wanted to steer away from tying the site to any specific cultural identity because we're interviewing people from as many places as possible. So the idea of the pin is that instead of looking at us as a group of multicultural people, we're actually pinpointing the individual and finding out their story.
Right. That makes sense. It's a really, really good name. Well done. And what's in the future for you guys? What other things are you hoping to branch into, or if there's any at all?
Well, we're hoping to grow the media platform that we use for the site. We'd really love to move into podcasts and video work. And we'd also love to host events and just enable people to come together and meet each other and realize that as unique as our stories are, we're not alone in the world. Awesome. Really good story. You guys are doing an amazing work. I look forward to more on your website, and thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure.
And here's a music video from the band Sasquatch with Nkechi Anele as lead vocalist.
I used to. Slipping all over cause they're walking in my old shoes. Learn from I used to.
I'm back, Chef. How's that masala coming along?
It's almost ready to plate up, just waiting on the sauce, and we'll toss it all together and serve it up.
Yum, I can't wait. Well, let's go back and let Chef Stolley finish it all off. Through new media, in this case blogging, Colleen Chifamba has created a space that gives her a voice to highlight some of the issues that affect people with disabilities. Her blog is called Life Through the Disability Lens, and she joins me now to tell me more about it. Welcome, Colleen.
Thank you, Dorcas.
Now, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what prompted you to start your blog?
Okay, so I was born in Harare, Zimbabwe, and I moved to Melbourne, Australia in 2007 to study university, and just had a normal uni experience, I suppose. And growing up back home, I had a normal childhood despite having a disability. And when I finished my undergraduate, I moved back home for 18 months. And it was during that time I began to notice just how different I was from everyone around me, and how there was a lack of opportunities for people with disabilities. And so when I came back to Australia in 2012, the same frustrations that I had at the time back home continued. And one night in July of 2013, I sat on my computer and I was like, okay, let's do this. Let me create my own space where I can talk about my frustrations, because at the time I had no one I could speak to that could understand what I was going through as a person with a disability.
Yeah. And you know, it's come so far that you actually have been nominated as Best Blogger of the Year in Zimbabwe. Do you want to tell me about your nomination?
Yes, so I have been nominated for a Zimbabwe International Women's Awards Blogger of the Year. Nominations were open to the public. The public nominated me. I was chosen as a finalist, and here I am.
Here you are. Yeah. On your blog, you highlight a lot of important issues, and one of them is ignorance. And you say people are ignorant because they're not exposed to disability. And how do you find new media and, you know, combating this issue of ignorance?
When you think about it, the traditional channels of media, say newspapers, TV, they're not really open to people with disabilities. You don't see people with disabilities on TV as TV presenters, in music videos, and you hardly see any articles in the newspapers about disability issues. So blogging, social media gives us people with disabilities a platform to talk about whatever it is we want to talk about regarding our lives, and we, in doing so, we are in charge of the narrative that we want to put out there. So we become in charge of our stories instead of someone else who doesn't have a disability telling our stories.
People say you're inspirational and you're strong, and, you know, they say all these words, but you actually don't like it.
No,
you don't,
absolutely not.
You do not like that. Can you tell me why?
Simply because I feel that there is nothing inspiring about my life with a disability. I get up every morning like everybody else. I do things like everybody else. Granted, I do them differently. So what really is inspiring about me walking on the street like everybody else? Absolutely nothing. And as the late Australian disability activist Stella Young pointed out, that what inspiration porn actually does, what people without disabilities don't realize is subconsciously, when they look at images of people with disabilities, yes, they may view us as inspirational, but what they don't realize is what's happening subconsciously is they look at us and they say, oh, look at her, she uses crutches. Oh, so my life is not that hard after all, because, you know, there's someone else who has it worse, and somewhat makes people without disabilities feel better about their lives. But it does not in any shape or form make me feel any better when someone says that I inspire them. What have I done? Whose life have I changed? Whose life has I touched? You know?
Yeah. You wake up and, like you said, you live a normal life, but you do have challenges.
Of course. Yes.
And can you tell me some of the, you know, the simplest things that people might not realize that actually are your biggest challenges?
So, for example, simple tasks as going grocery shopping. You know, for people without disabilities, it's as simple as getting into a car, getting into a bus, going to the tram, and just walking to the supermarket.
Yeah.
Whereas for someone like myself, I have to think, okay, how am I getting there? Am I going to take the bus? Am I going to take the tram? And, you know, I don't have the luxury of buying everything that I want. So in a week, I can go to the supermarket maybe 2, 3, 4 times just so that I can finish all my groceries. And even then, I'm very limited as to how much I can actually carry. And when I'm actually in the supermarket, again, there's no one to assist me in terms of pushing a trolley or carrying a shopping basket or even taking things off the top shelves. There's a lot of challenges that people do not see, which is why I then say there's nothing inspiring about my life.
About living a life.
Exactly.
You've got quite a big following on your blog. And you know, people speak to you back. And how does that make you feel when you communicate with people who follow you, follow your stories, comment on what you're saying and all that sort of stuff?
There's a lot of positive comments, people whose lives have been changed, people whose lives have been touched, people whose eyes have been opened to the challenges, and some have even been inspired to actively start to do things in their communities for people with disabilities.
Yeah. And there's a you know, the idea of blogging.
Yes.
It presents freedom of speech, or, you know, freedom of choice, you know, that virtual world where we kind of go in and we kind of escape the real world and that. But also with that comes language, you know, with freedom of speech comes language. And and you wrote, or you responded to an article about language where they were talking about a husband, a father who left the mother because their child was disabled. Tell me a little bit about, you know, because that was a very, you know, a good response, if I can say so.
Okay,
Tell me
so
about that.
it was an article that I wrote for a publication back home in Zimbabwe called Her Zimbabwe. So the title of the post was How Language Creates a Culture of Discrimination. So in my native language, Shona, it uses all the negative terms to describe a person with a disability, and the English language is no different. In all honesty, it's no different. There's a lot of emphasis that's placed on the actual disability instead of the person. So a lot of people say disabled person, but it's the correct terminology is actually a person with a disability, because when you use language that focuses on the disability instead of the person, you make the disability to be more important than the person, and that just relegates the person to nothing really, because you're saying that their disability defines them, their disability is more important. So it's important for society to use the right terminology in discussing disability issues and talking about people with disabilities, because when you use negative words and negative connotations, it obviously creates a negative culture, and it creates a culture of discrimination against people with disabilities.
Yeah, and that's very important. You keep doing what you're doing.
Thank
and
you.
I love your blog, and everyone get out there, support her, and you know, just open up to other people around you. And remember, language is very important. People with disabilities, not a disabled person. Thank you so much for joining me today, guys. I've had a good time, but right now, Chef Stolley and I are going to dig into these masala chips. We'll see you next time. Love and light to you. Cheers.
Ain't it funny? It's all about money, from a baby being born to a son being buried. We all equal without the 100. So it's forming policy, the culture now tarnished. Where did it all go? People we could follow. Jesus was a Jew, but his life was one we all know. Malcolm X died for a cause, but the free living changed by watching who's tomorrow. My Africa, Africa burning down.